Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Mans with Mans Organics. I've been back, I grew up on this farm, but back and actively farming since 2012. We built a greenhouse, and that's when I came back and definitely got into it. 2017 was the year for me where I went to Regina and sat under Graham's State for a few days, and that was kind of the turning point in my world for farming. So somewhere down the line, I think after that or around that time, I met Greg, and he's kind of my speed dial guy these days. Just a little background. We're certified organic, kind of a small farm by farming standards. We do mostly vegetables, and we basically wholesale into Alberta, but you kind of have a direct marketing system. That's just an overhead view of our farm. Sorry, a little nervous. That piece there, sorry, that's the neighbors, but the rest here is our farm. You can see the veggies, everything under, we operate under two small pivots, but we do a lot of our veggies in what we call just pies. It's a little outlook of what we took quite a few years ago, just the range of the produce we grow. The melons here probably appeal to a few more people that have tasted them. One thing to point out right away is probably one of our number one comments is, the tomato tasted like my grandma's, or, I've never tasted cantaloupe like yours, or the produce manager of a store saying, I've been buying cantaloupe for 10 years, but yours came in the store and now the entire store smells like cantaloupe. And my take on that is what this kind of farming gives, right? That is the proof of farming with healthy soil, healthy plants. That's the end result, or I'm still on the journey. I'm learning a lot, so I'm by no means saying I have the answers, but it's definitely, proving itself. I've got a bunch of slides, and feel free to ask questions, but field history, we have a history of some manure from, my dad had a background in feedlot before we went organic, and we have a history of some manure from that time and some composting off and on in the past years. But it's been quite a few years since any real volume application of compost. We find we're really not short on any nutrition. It's more of a tweaking and a balancing and a working with it type of practice. What you see here is kind of a home-built extractor / injector. What we were doing is using this to apply things like micronized gypsum at 100 or 200 pounds an acre, or putting vermicompost straight through, basically injecting, but getting it out through the water so we could practically apply some of these products but it's a management thing. Like when we did this, you're sitting there for 10 hours a day, every 5 minutes cycle, you're dumping bags of product in. So these are things that work for me because of my scale, but that's the kind of tools we've been working with. One note, as an organic farmer, a lot of the time the question is, right, it's always been, well, where's your nitrogen? What we found is that at the end of the day, the nitrogen is really not the problem. We don't tend to be low on nitrogen. It's not a holdup. It's not put it this way, if you're thinking about the biological farming, I don't think it should be a fear. There's more of I would say, a concern or a balance about, nutrition and balancing in general, plant health, aerobic soil. This picture is a picture of, we used to grow some spring wheat, and we would do a seed treatment. So that was, for us, it was quite simple. I just went from tote bag to tote bag with forklifts, and we literally had a mix, a 5-gallon pail with a hole drilled in the bottom and a 4-inch auger on an electric motor, and that's how we mixed, And one of the things was, if you ever do anything like that, once that comes out of, into the first tote, it's like, oh, this is wet. This is going to be, glued solid tomorrow morning. But give it an hour, and it's amazing. It dries up, and we would have this, chocolate brown wheat seed that we were putting in the ground. But we've gone away from growing wheat and focused on the veggies. This is a more current picture. It's actually, so Brian started the conversation. I actually have a pig pen this year, which I inoculated from Brian's compost. So we got maybe jump start on our first generation, so thanks, Brian. That is a filter bag. I think, Greg, you have one to show tomorrow, or you have one? What we've done here is this is a cone bottom tank we're using to inject in the greenhouse, but what I did is I used that extractor I showed you previously. I put two like 50-pound bulk bags, mesh bags in there, let it bubble for about half an hour, let it settle just for a few minutes, but then just drain that through a 2-inch hose with a hose clamp into this big filter bag. And they do plug up over time, but I think it's 100 micron. And this final result, I can inject straight through the greenhouse irrigation system, no filter issues, no anything. So this probably would do a couple 100 gallons, maybe even a couple batches if your what you have has settled out just a little bit. But so maybe not. I don't know how good it would work on a large scale, but for us, that filter bag was and they're not expensive. They're like $10 from McMaster-Carr. But yeah, check it out. Greg has one. Another quick set of pictures. We do a lot of work with nutrition. So sometimes people think, well, you're organic, you don't have tools. Well, I have a lot of tools. I have probably about 60 different inputs I can use, and nutrition is key. We do a lot of foliar spraying. I do a lot of sap analysis. I have about 700 sap analysis on my own crop under my belt, of course, largely greenhouse crops. But yeah, so take a sap sample on Monday morning, ship it out to Holland, have the results back Thursday or Friday morning, and go out and foliar spray. So just quick tweaking results to keep your crop up. Same thing from the days of growing wheat. That's just basically blind harrowing. Actually, the Einbach fellow, he's out here, but that was, I couldn't sit in the tractor. That's too hard on my nerves, but this would be an 80 or 100 bushel wheat crop. It just, you think you're killing it. So I would tell my dad to drive, I will get it set, and then I leave because it's too hard on the nerves. But you learn that just from practice, and it looks brutal. People think, oh, you're taking out your crop, but that was very effective weed control. So I just threw that in, right? You discover and you learn. I mean, I'm the kind of guy too, you just jump in with 2 feet and try it. As long as you learn, if you make mistakes, to me, that's the same tuition as you, or maybe even better tuition than if you pay it up front. So, mistakes cost money, but make sure you learn from them. A couple of more random pictures. So this is propane flame weeding for onions, so pre-emergence. So we've been growing about 7 acres of onions for probably about 15 years now. And so that's just one method of weed control. You seed the onions in a couple days, or ideally, few hours before they come up. 8 million BTUs on 7 feet at a mile an hour, and there's no weeds left after that. This is just a picture from in the greenhouse, penetrometer into the handles, sometimes with one hand. So we have seen some good results. I think I have another slide on that. And I used to have sheep. I would let them free roam. We've got some beef now, mostly for keeping our freezers full. But there you go. So that's these are both current pictures from this fall. So the pigs, the pen, you've heard from Brian. I'm newer to that, experimenting with it. So far, so good. I really like the compost. I'm working towards more high volume extracts, especially on the small scale in the greenhouse and on the field crops. And these cows are just grazing on cover crops. So we have 100 acres, but we're growing about 30 acres of veggies, and we're actually just, I can stay there for now. We're just using cover crops and what I would call maybe green manuring for all the other acres. So we don't actively farm every acre every year. I have pieces of the farm that are for 2 years, they're just in cover crop. And our strategy there is a spring, about a mid to later May planting of a cover crop, a blend, and then we terminate that. Actually, I do have a picture of that later. We terminate that in July, and we give it about 3 weeks, and then we come and seed another cover crop, which we let winter kill and stand. But that also gives me opportunity for more grazing. So I don't have a lot, but just a few cows. And yeah, I've got a family of 7 with number 8 on the way, so my boys are starting to out-eat me. Yeah, so onion harvest. This picture here, I actually put it in, and I have I don't know if is Glenn here, or is he still talking? It's okay. I'll tell him later. This is a Glen or GSR story. So I used some GSR in the early years, didn't really know here and there. We had a crop of onions and they came up, but then it was dry, and we had basically a 3/4 inch to 1.25 inch tall onion. They're very dainty, and they were kind of like stuck in this 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch crust. It was just a really hard crust, and they were, onions actually come up with like a kink and then they stand up. So we actually went out with 5 pounds of GSR dormant on 7 acres, and then we put the pivot across at 100%. So that's about, probably less than 1/4 inch of water. And that crust was gone and it never came back. So partly to add to that crust, we were actually starting to hand weed. This is our solar powered weeder where 3 of our employees lay on and pull weeds. The other thing was the crust was brutal. When you're trying to pull a little weed and you got to get into that crust, it's hard on the finger. So basically that one application of GSR dormant, a little bit of water, crust was gone, never came back. So that kind of to me was the moment that crystallized that product really does work. This is a mix we grew several years ago for a neighbor. He was looking for a chicken feed blend, and he asked if we'd be willing to grow something together. So this was a polyculture, kind of like a cover crop, and we grew it together, put it in the swath and put it in the combine, and he fed it to his chickens. So it was just, he didn't need it after that, and we've gone away from it, but just as an example, it was really neat to see. We also had spring wheat that year as well, and it was interesting to see how the various species in here, like the wheat was actually delayed in here compared to our other wheat, and yet the other crops in here, so combining was relatively successful, and it was sunflowers to buckwheat to green peas to flax to, I think there was some vetch in there, and the spring wheat, and some oats and some millet. So it was, when he got it analyzed, it was actually nearly a perfect blend for egg laying for chickens. I think something in that 17 or 18% protein. It's kind of a neat thing, but we never carried on with it. So one of the things too is I've definitely seen, like I said earlier, we're still learning. I've seen good soil. I've seen, where you're really happy with roots, and I've had areas of the farm where penetrometer is really going in, you're putting a shovel in the fall and you're seeing worms and you're seeing aggregation to 10, 12 inches. But I'll also say that I've seen that decline. Like it's not, oh, I got there, from now on, it's fine, right? It's like, it needs active management. I also think that we are under irrigation water, and irrigation water is not rainwater. We kind of heard that today, but I think that's a bigger thing than we realize. So that's probably one of the places I'm looking at more as well. So we're also bad guys like Brian, because we like our rototillers. We've upgraded to a bigger one now, as well as auto steer, but because a 7-foot rototiller on like 30 or 40 acres, that does take a few days. But cover crop, what we came to was high-speed disc, no good, right? 2-3 passes, it's bunching, you're not getting it all. While the rototiller, you can go literally 1.5 inches deep. You can go 3 or 4 miles per hour. It chops, it cuts, it kind of puts it in the top layer, and it's 99% termination, and it's 1 pass. So to us, that's the ticket to our July termination of cover crops. What we usually do is let it kind of dry and make sure the crop is dead, and then we'll put some water on. And once we put the water on, usually we see the biology and the worms come back and eat up that crop, and then a few weeks later we'll try come in and seed again. A couple pictures from in the greenhouse. So we have a lot of worms, and here you see a black drip line. Sorry, I use drip lines, Dr. Dykstra. I was going to think when you were saying that earlier, I have one strategy that I've already done for a few years, and that's kind of, I tend to find a good result when I irrigate a little heavier over a few weeks and then go light for a few weeks. I kind of do a bit of an up and down, just by gut feeling, but maybe I'll have to look into that a little bit more, because we're in the soil, so we're not reliant on daily water, but we do that because that's kind of what industry does, and that's how we learn. But we have seen fungal growth, but back to here we've have worm castings that have literally built up over one season and covered and buried 3/4 inch drip lines. So We have used vermicompost so that we do have the night crawlers in the soil as well. But the amount of recycling and activity of the biology is incredible. We bottom prune our crops. I think I might have so here's another picture of the, this is all just worm. And by the way, vermicompost is amazing plant food. We used to, earlier cucumber crops, if they were struggling, we used to have a drip line where we had a dripper and a stake. I could buy a local vermicompost and we would put one coffee mug's worth by a plant and put that irrigation water drip line in the top, and within 3 days that little pile of vermicompost was completely rooted in. So the plants just love it. It's just availability of nutrients compared to soil, right? They just really cycle. And this is field crops. So same thing, it's nice to see that aggregated soil, but I'm finding it's still probably our biggest challenge in our field soils is probably still overall tightness, lack of breathing. So yeah, greenhouse crops, peppers, lots of diversity. We were doing a ginger interplanting for a while. I put flowers in. My only control for insects is biocontrol, so I'm buying beneficial insects, wasps, parasitic wasps, beneficial mites, putting them in. But yeah, the big crops, actually the tomatoes more so, we do a lot of pruning. So every week we're pruning. And initially we were always taking all the prunings and clippings outside, and now we just drop them on the soil. And at the beginning of the season, sometimes it takes 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks for, I'm going to say, the biology to realize that we're feeding it on top. But once that kicks in, every week we're doing it, and every week there's not more there. So I would say it takes biology only 1 week to eat a fresh leaf that's been dropped on the ground. And this way, when we're doing our sap analysis every 3 weeks, we're doing nutrition, we're trying to balance that plant. Instead of taking that nutrition away and tossing it out, we're putting it back in the soil to recycle it right away. Because keep in mind that tomato vines, by the end of the year, we're in the 44-foot range from root to tip for tomato plants. This is a current picture of my last pepper propagation. And one of the things I was going to mention is, so for the soil blend is actually a place where I've used the KRT instrument to, we were mixing potting soil, we were buying a blend, and we were adding some vermicompost and a few things, but I used the instrument to really fine tune what are all the ingredients that basically make this potting soil really, really pop. And the results were incredible. We have huge rooting. I'll have plants that are 6, 8 inches tall, and the roots will be full in a 4-inch pot. So we've seen a tremendous amount of rooting. So just a really positive result, and definitely one of the tools we use. Okay, I think that's kind of the end already. Any questions? Sorry, I kind of ran through that. Feel a little nervous. Yeah.
What was the machine you were using for your weed control the wheat?
Yeah, we were using a Hudson Beekler Harrow, but it's the fellow right outside here from Front Link. They sell those too. It's just a tine harrow, so it's like a light duty version of a heavy harrow, maybe you could call it a quite light version. And it's the technique is to, I guess, have a fairly strong wheat plant that can, because sometimes you're basically burying them all the way. But if it doesn't rain and it's just a little bit of dry soil, then in a day or two they can kind of push that off and keep growing. But it's about technique and angle and speed, and it's lots of organic or biological farming is like touchy-feely. Like there's no science. Like, I mean, I take a soil test and you look at all the numbers, you run the numbers, and then when you're all done, you rub your stomach and you say, well, that's what I do because that's what I trust, right? Like I go with my gut because, literature and paper and books, you know your own farm, right? And that's what it comes down to, so. Yeah.
Andrew, when you use that flame weeder, usually I've read that kill a lot of beneficial bugs like predator bugs.
Okay.
What's the downside of the flame weeder? Have you been noticing that, or?
I don't know. It's usually quite early in the year, like later April, early May, so it's still generally probably a bit cool. I do know I've been asked before about the heat and destroying soil. But even though it's that much power, it's like the soil temperature might increase by a few degrees for a few seconds, but there's no capacity to really burn up deeper, right? So because if for example there's moisture on the ground, you got to wait till it's dry because you're losing too much energy just burning off the moisture. So but for beetles and stuff that crawl across the surface, it could be, but I haven't noticed or couldn't say to that. Yeah.
You said your sheep were free range. Sheep generally are free range.
Yeah.
You have fences.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have fences, I guess, is what I was getting at. Yeah. Weirdly enough, so a note on sheep to pigs. I would say that sheep eat more different things than pigs. Pigs are pickier than sheep. Sheep, like onions, was their favorite food. If we would come out with a crate of second-grade onions, like a couple 100 pounds, the sheep are all over you, and they eat onions straight, and then they smell like onions for 3 days too. Like they loved onions. They would dig through a compost pile to expose the onions. The sheep would, not the pigs. So.
Have you noticed that your bricks is lower in your greenhouse versus outside?
Not particularly. I've seen a range probably from about 5 to 14 or 15. That's kind of been my range, but it's very much what I find, especially in the greenhouse, is variety. Like a grape tomato will achieve the 13, 14 bricks fairly readily. The beefsteak tomato, it's a lot more of a challenge, and the cucumbers is my lowest bricks in general. What I can say is that, for example, with proper nutrition, I definitely believe, I've seen it, and I can't say I can always replicate it, but that proper nutrition on a plant will be no disease, for sure no disease. I've seen that for sure. No insects I'm still working on, but no disease. If cucumber plants are in balance, micronutrients, everything is good. We've had a couple years now with no powdery mildew, which can be, or in the cucumber world, is one of the bigger challenges in greenhouses. And when things are out of whack, you will get it. Like I've certainly seen a correlation, but it's not that I have a protocol or a way to be like, well, I can always get there. Still learning. Field crops, I actually don't test bricks that often. I rely on my SAP analysis a lot more because it's got all the data.
Any other questions?
The only thing is when you harrowed that field, it looked like you filled a stone down.
Yeah, it looks like that because it goes from, usually quite nice green, right? You do it at the stage where you're like, oh, this crop is awesome. It's taken off, and that's when you need to do it. And then it goes from, green to almost all the way brown. So like I said, it was really hard on my nerves. I wasn't stressed out by much, but I didn't like it. But I'd seen it, like once you do it once or twice, you kind of really know what you're looking for. And then the other factor was, for example, if you would do that, and I think a couple hours later you get a hard rain, you probably killed the crop. But in 2 days, if it's dry, we're on a loam to sandy loam, so it's just, typically the pieces are small, and it would just, and if there's areas you overlap or something, you can do some damage. But I guess the benefits for us far outweighed the negatives.
If you're an organic farmer, you probably look the other way when you think the neighbors are watching, right?
Yeah, I think I'll steal some words from Glenn. I think Glenn said it somewhere along the line. I used to say, it looks like I'm crazy, and if you don't believe it, just come and I'll prove it to you. I think Glenn is the one who said that initially, so. Yeah.
So the SAP analysis tool, how do you use it in your business?
Yeah, so I'm actually taking what's called new leaf and old leaf samples. So it's 2 sets of samples from the same set of plants, and it's the new leaf is considered the first or most recent fully developed new leaf, and then the last functional leaf, like the oldest functional leaf on a plant. And I take sets of those and I put them in a bag and I ship to Holland, and then they do the analysis and send it back to me. So it's everything from EC to sugars to all the micronutrients, molybdenum, and then from there I basically design or strategize my nutrition. I have the handheld meters, but I don't use them very often. It's more of a comparison tool, if that makes sense. Yeah.
How come you ship it all the way to Holland? There's a lab in
Yeah, partly because I was doing this well before the Red Deer Lab, and the other thing is because I buy enough per year, the price is better, and because I'm doing automatically with my greenhouse, I'm doing 10 samples for sure, and I'm up to 16 or 18, which is a great big bag full anyways. So my cost, because of that amount, my cost of freight is not bad. So I'm significantly, I'm 25 to 35% of the cost of Red Deer yet because of that. But for anybody else here, if you're doing like one-offs, yeah, you can't, you know, go that route probably. Yeah.
Can you elaborate more on companion planting and what advantages you've seen with companion planting?
Yeah. We didn't do much beyond that one field crop, that mix we grew for chicken feed. It just, in that case, basically would just be observation, but it just seemed like all the different plants kind of had certain effects on the other ones. Like it was like a community, right? You would say, well, the wheat would normally do this. Well, now it's a bit different, right? And I didn't grow all the other crops on their own, so I can't speak to that, but it seemed like a neat thing to do. Then you get the benefit of polyculture and you still, you know, because we put it through the combine and hauled it to his place, right? There was no cleaning, no anything, because it's feed. So it was simple, and it seemed like the right thing to do for the benefit of the diversity of species.
And in the greenhouse, like you always do it in the greenhouse, right?
Yeah.
Advantage there?
I always have liked the fact of just different roots in the ground at the same time. Just seemed logical. That would be part of it. The other thing is some of it stems from diversity of habitat for beneficial insects. Whether, you know, I'm right or wrong, I don't know. And actually now I don't actually plant as much in the greenhouse underneath anymore, because once a tomato plant jumps up and canopies over in February, those plants underneath just don't do much. But we unless it's like a volunteer tomato, pretty much anything else that grows, we just let it grow because it's not, if it doesn't interfere with us, then it's not a problem. So we're kind of, I guess you could say our greenhouse is probably pretty messy, right? If you're used to kind of the sterile greenhouse environments, then we're polar opposite, that's for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, have you extracted some of your hog compost already?
Yeah, so that one, I'll go back, I think, to that. Oh, wrong way, sorry. This is, so I had my pen started in May, and in August I actually pulled out, like, call it 1 ton with my Bobcat, just a bit, and I made just a little one heap compost pile, and this was extracted from that. So this was like real, in a sense, like chocolate milk kind of colored, a very brown, not thick because it's still watery, but I was actually quite surprised at how brown the extract was. So that's my first. We're actually in the process of composting the winter, like the rest of that pig pen now. All my pigs are gone for the season, so I'll probably carry on. I think we would like to do more with that, but when I did this in the greenhouse, what I would do is I would do a full irrigation, would be 100% compost extract, like we would just pump that straight out as straight extract.
So are you composting it in a windrow, and how do you do that since it's so cold now?
Yeah, the cold is fine when the compost is going strong because it melts the snow off the top even in -30. We don't have a turner, which is a little bit unfortunate. We're just using a front end loader, and it's what I don't like about that is you don't break up the smaller pieces, so you get more of a. But over time they will break up. It's just for that composting phase, it's just not. It would be nice to have a turner, but it's just not something we're kind of. It's a fairly big investment, then we don't have a tractor with a creeper gear, so we're kind of, not ready for that part yet. Yeah.
With your underpatch, do you have any issues with maggots and things like that?
No, we haven't. We've actually not had any. I should clarify a little bit. We tried to grow sweet corn twice, and we had corn borer problems, so we just don't grow that crop. But in our, garlic and onions, those are our main field crops. Cantaloupe, we have a rhubarb patch, but we haven't had any pest issues. It's always been fine. We've never, or diseases really. Those are crops that overall, they've not been an issue for us that way. Thank you.